outsource their personal responsibility
Yeah.
to outside sources like the government or
Mm.
your parents or your boss or whatever it is. And, you know, I study psychotherapy as well. So it's a lot about empowering people to take responsibility for their own lives. That's very, very
Yeah.
important, I think.
So why did you decide to become a doctor? And I appreciate it might be a massive question, but you know what, just I guess kind of I'm interested, kind of a bit about your background, kind of why you decided to go on the path that you went on.
So I grew up in Malta,
Yeah.
and Malta is the kind of country where if you're good at biology and chemistry and, you know, you're kind of academically
Yeah.
able, you're very much encouraged to do something like medicine. It's, you know, and for very, very good reasons.
Mm.
It's seen as a reliable profession, also like a noble profession and a moral profession. And I was very interested in biology for sure.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of the challenge. And when I then went to medical school, I did notice that even though there were some parts of it I really loved, like physiology, I loved learning about how the body works. When it came to actually clinical medicine, there was something missing for me, you know, treating sort of more conventional physical illnesses.
Yeah.
And then eventually I had my psychiatry rotation in my final year.
Mm.
And at the time I couldn't make sense of it, but it was fascinating. There's something about the dark places that someone's mind can go to
Yeah.
in states of pathology. Not only was it fascinating, but I think in those extreme sort of psychopathological states, there's a lot we can learn that everyone can learn from and take with them for their lives. That's what I've since come to recognize. I then went to Scotland and did sort of my conventional medical training, which was the most difficult, but the most character building years of my life. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And it wasn't what I want to do long term, but being a junior doctor is genuinely one of the most useful things you can do because it makes you so resilient and able to handle difficult challenges. I can't tell you how many situations you go in where you have no idea if you're going to be able to pull it off or figure it out. And then by hook or by crook,
Yeah.
you do it. So you learn something about your own capacity and how often you have way more resources than you think.
Yeah.
So I did that. I considered a few different specialties, like maybe anesthesiology because of the physiology aspect, or maybe being a GP. But what I then came to realize is being a GP now is very different to how it used to be. And actually, if you want to sit and spend time with people and learn how to be with people and learn about people's behavior, why they behave the way they do and their emotions and their patterns, psychiatry is clearly the way to go. So on the advice of a friend, I applied to the South London and Maudsley training program. And I've pretty much, you know, been there ever since. So I've been there 4 years now. And I'm also pursuing psychotherapy training simultaneously at the Metanoia Institute, which is a psychotherapy school in West London. That I've just started that.
Nice. So quite busy.
Sorry, that's a kind of a rambling answer, but
so
quite busy.
Yeah. So I mean,
and I should mention I also do a podcast about mental health as well.
Fantastic. And what's the podcast called for people who are listening?
So that's the Maudsley Learning Podcast.
Fantastic. So yeah, for those who are listening, get on that. There's a wealth of information there that will help pretty much anyone. So yeah, great stuff. So I guess, and again, although a lot of our listeners are actually quite well educated, so we can kind of go off on tangent.
Yeah.
But I guess just to kind of start simple and then kind of go from there. So you're well into psychiatry, but you're also studying psychotherapy. What are the main differences between the two? Why would you want to study both?
That's a good question. So psychiatry, the way to think about it is it's the medical specialization that concerns itself with mental health.
Yeah.
So it's seeing mental health through a medical lens. which means thinking about diagnosing people with mental health conditions, or importantly, excluding certain diagnoses based on the symptoms that they're coming in with, and then trying to figure out what's the cause of that condition. And psychiatric conditions tend to have many, what we would say is a multifactorial cause, so lots of different things contributing. And then how do we treat the illness, of course, and what's the prognosis? So what can we expect over the course of a lifetime with certain kinds of conditions? And I would say the medical model for mental health is very useful in many situations, but also carries many flaws. And then perhaps later we can get into that. And then psychotherapy is the art, which I would say is an art informed by science, of how to help people make changes in their life. And that might be change in their mental attitudes, change in the way they understand themselves, the way they map out their thoughts and their emotions and their behavior, the way they might understand their early life experiences and how that maps on to their present day relationships.
Yeah.
So psychotherapy is the art of entering a dialogue with your patient or your client and helping them to make some sort of meaningful change, by their own measure, by what do you think is a valuable change to make. So it's quite different. I think they do complement each other. And the reason why I moved into psychotherapy is just because I've realized over time that's the crux of what I'm interested in, is how people are the way they are and why, and what are their patterns, and then how can we change these in a positive direction.
Okay, nice. Okay, so in the future, you kind of, I guess you're hoping to almost combine and create this, I guess, fairly unique service to people that truly encompasses who that person is, not just their symptoms and diagnosis, but ultimately kind of who they are and how they can achieve more of a, I guess, positive or a different way of life.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people the medical model will be really useful. For some people the psychotherapeutic model will be really useful, and for some it will be a mixture of both. There's so much controversy, I would say, nowadays over what kind of approach is the best way to deal with a certain problem. And what I worry about, and one of the reasons I started my podcast, is I felt the public conversation is not very sophisticated and it's very polemic. So the example I always use is like, if you see like an article or program about mental health, it's to be like, antidepressants, are they good or are they bad? Which it's like, that's the wrong way to start the conversation. It has to be, in what circumstances might antidepressants be useful? In what circumstances might they not be useful and we're prescribing them anyway? Because from my own experience, I can mention a number of cases where antidepressants weren't useful or weren't really the right way to go about it, and then other cases where they've saved lives. So it's a sophisticated, like any complex area, it requires a complex conversation, a complex solution.
It requires more thought than just the binary good, bad, evil, good, and but I think that's the way generally, I know, especially in the UK, people tend to be brought up that way. So I think when you turn on the media or you pick up like the tabloids, that's the mentality that is carried forward. Like, are they good or bad? Like, well, there is this whole mile-long area in the middle, which is the conversation.
There's a good psychological concept which maps onto this. So there's a psychoanalyst named Melanie Klein, who was I believe you'd call her a neo-Freudian. And she developed this idea that a human being at any one point in time occupies one of two mental attitudes. Either you're in what's called the paranoid schizoid position, or you're in the ambivalent or depressive position. And he says children, when they're growing up, they tend to predominantly initially be in what's called the paranoid schizoid position. And that's all about, you know, everything's either a 1 or a 0, good or bad. The parent, mom, is either a good mom if she's feeding me, or bad mom if she's neglecting me. It's us or them. And then as we get older, we tend to spend more of our time in the ambivalent or the depressive position, which doesn't mean depressed, but it means the recognition, the very sober recognition that actually everyone has good and bad in them.
Yeah.
And everything has kind of an element of good or bad in it, which is a much more mature but also difficult reality to contend with. And you can see, you know, if you interact with people, you can see how people can flip from one position to the other. Like if I haven't had enough sleep, I'm going to be in the paranoid schizoid position for sure. Or if I'm, you know, if people are triggered by trauma from their childhood, that can make them flip into that position too. So it's very interesting to see it play out, not just on an individual level, but now on a cultural level in the media and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people deny that polarity within them. It's like they try and get away from that darkness within them, but ultimately it's, for me, and this is my own journey, and I guess on my podcast I'm very open and honest. It's, I guess, for ages I would try and push that kind of, whatever that dark side is, I would try and push that away and try, I need to be better, I need to be more positive. But actually it's about the acceptance of that and kind of ingraining it in yourself, saying, well, okay, this is who I am, this is all of me, who I am, and all of me can move forward. And it's about kind of, growing up, basically.
100%.
Physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever it may be, it's about that kind of
100%. I mean, humans are a very aggressive species.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can think of aggression as not just fighting or conflict, but a more kind of global definition of aggression is going out into the world, to projecting yourself out into the world.
Yeah.
And that can be, you know, obviously in a way that's positive or not. And I suppose channeling aggression into a more productive way of life is much better, much more, I would say, psychologically efficient than spending a lot of energy trying to push things down. And you must know that more than anyone, you work in fitness and the gym and lifting weights, and that's all about channeling that aggression in a way that's productive. You know? Like lifting weights is so much better than playing Call of Duty all day, you know.
It has its pluses, but definitely. It's funny because I'm studying for my master's degree in physiotherapy, and a growing amount of the physiotherapy is about, I would say, going down the road of more, not that it is, but going down the road of lessons from psychotherapy. It's about listening and understanding that person, their story, you know, what it is they're actually telling us. And it allows us to actually create better programs, better outcomes for that person. And I've always found that to be interesting when I worked in type 2 diabetes prevention as part of the prevention program in the UK. And a lot of that is, you know, we know all the information, we know what someone has to do, you know, but it's we can't go into that binary kind of, you know, paradigm of, oh, this is what you have to do, and it's then the hierarchy, you know, I'm doing what's best for you. But when you actually talk to a person, you find out what they want, what motivates them, their goals, their aspirations, and then you can find out a way of kind of working it into that. And the results just, they look after themselves. They suddenly go, oh yeah, I've never thought about just taking my dog out an extra time per day because I really enjoy that. Or I used to enjoy, you know, going and socializing, playing bowls, for instance, because it was dealing with the older population. And it didn't occur to them, I could probably do that a bit more because I've got a bit more time instead of sit down. And it's these little tweaks, these realizations for people that when you truly talk to someone and you understand what makes them tick, results are phenomenal.
I have to say, I have a huge respect for physiotherapy. I think it's one of the most underrated of the sort of allied health
Yeah.
professionals. It's like I've had my own experiences with needing physiotherapy. I've
Yeah.
dislocated my shoulder, and I've obviously seen physiotherapists in action. And I just think people need to understand more how important it is to take care of all of those soft tissues, the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, maintaining them again, getting back to an idea of preventing
Yeah.
and maintaining rather than treating things when they go wrong. It's like it's insane that we live in a world where everyone will like brush their teeth, twice a day, every day, because they know, you shouldn't treat tooth decay, you should prevent it. But we don't take care of our minds. We don't take care of our like all those, our bodies, our physical bodies. It's all we have. We have
Yeah.
our physical bodies more than we have our house or
Yeah.
our
Really good
car.
point.
They're the only thing that's really ours. But
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Is there any particular, I guess, illness or mental illness that you've seen, whether anecdotal or whether evidence-based, that has been on a drastic increase? Have you kind of witnessed or experienced kind of, and why do you think that is?
that's a good question. Let me just think about that for a second.
Yeah, just throw it out there.
I think both anecdotally from what I hear from people I know, but also I think the research is starting to suggest this, particularly in the States,
Yeah.
anxiety and self-harm in younger people. So
Wow.
I think there's work by an American psychologist called Jonathan Haidt
Yeah.
that talks about this. And he has a book called, I think, The Coddling of the American Mind, which is all about this subject.
Mm.
And he did a sort of epidemiological analysis, which seems to show a correlation between self-harm and anxiety in young people and social media, which
Wow.
is obviously this now, since a documentary called The Social Dilemma has come out about social media. And I think as a population we're all starting to wake up to this idea of how damaging it could be. But I don't think it's just social media. I think anxiety and distress is a lot about the human being's relationship with our environment.
Yeah.
I think we evolved, this is an evolutionary lens, we evolved to be in a constant tension with our environment and the struggles that it forces us to go through. And I think that's where the human mind is happiest, when we have enough challenges
Yeah.
to overcome. That gives us a sense of accomplishment and efficacy and mastery, but obviously not so much of a challenge that it's overwhelming and either we die or it's just psychologically too much. But what we have is, and social media is only one aspect of this. What we have is a culture and a society that's gone too far in the direction of comfort.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying this with a takeaway cappuccino in my hand, but it's still true. Comfort is what we've prioritized for about 50 to 100 years. And I think now we're seeing the results. We're seeing people who are so anxious because they don't have enough problems to solve. They can take a back seat, and they can just kind of live in this kind of gray area. At least what I find personally is, I'm the happiest when I find challenges that are meaningful and then set about like going through them. Even if I fail, failure isn't nice, but it's still, there's so much to be learned from failure and so little to be learned from success. So that's, yeah, I mean, when coronavirus hit, for instance, it was so interesting to see people's reaction, because for the first time people were making contact with how, on a mass scale, people were making contact with how difficult life can be. We had it pretty easy since about World War II till about coronavirus. We didn't have like a generational challenge where the whole world had to face some huge obstacle. Then coronavirus hits and everyone was reacting to it like it's bad customer service initially. Everyone was just like, oh, I didn't order this pandemic. Where did this pandemic come from? This wasn't on my schedule. This conflicts with my course that I'm going to do and my conferences. I'm all different from that. But it's fascinating. Now, I think this is a huge opportunity for everyone to make contact with how unforgiving life can be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a couple of points there. There's a biological anthropologist in the States called Frank Ferencich, who's written a bunch of different books. He's very much a naturalist, and he lives by the ethos to challenge, not comfort. And it's what I encourage I've got 2 young kids, what I encourage them to do. I constantly, ever so slightly, put them into not completely uncomfortable situation where they're going to have, real anxiety, but, put them out there, that it's okay to feel like this, and it's okay to be this way. And I can help you. I can, be there to support you. And that's one thing aside, but just getting into nature is phenomenal. I know when the lockdown first happened in the UK and schools shut, my eldest is 6 years old. I saw such a big change in him, like really suffered mentally, away from his friends, away from everything. His behavior changed completely. So we would go for a walk every morning about 7 a.m. because everyone was up at 5 a.m. anyway. So we'd go for a walk about 7 a.m. We would go, we've got some nice woods near us, and we'd go out there, and it would flip straight away. He'd become this beautiful boy that I know. And it's amazing just to kind of, we would climb trees, we would, really kind of delve into that. And I used to take groups of adults in the woods, and we'd climb trees and kind of get in the dirt. And bear in mind, these are people we've known, I guess, mental illness problems. Not that I'm a therapist by any stretch. It's just I happen to go in the woods. They were personal training clients, and they would say, "Oh, I wouldn't mind doing that." I'm like, "Cool, join me then." And I would see such a change in these people, like unbelievable changes just getting in the woods, fresh air, climbing, getting dirty. We were laughing, we were, enjoying it. We were sweating, we were, being human, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess a friend and colleague of mine called Damien Macias wrote a book called The Magpie Effect. And it was a couple of years ago now, and he was talking about the link between mental illness and social media. And he's got tons of really, really useful information in there. He was a podcast guest as well. Some of the stuff in there, which a lot of it's evidence-based, blew my mind. Just what, the things that happen, especially to young people. And it doesn't surprise me that, self-harm and anxiety amongst young people is increasing. As a father, it scares the bejesus out of me. I'm not going to lie. Really is worrying. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that I guess any young people listening right now could possibly do more of?
I guess it would depend on the person in question, but I won't necessarily give direct advice, but I'll more think about what are the ways in which we can think about things, right? So I would probably tell a young person, think about, we have this very, very narrow bandwidth of attention. Let's really think about it for a second. There's the whole universe. How much of the universe can you take in a given moment? 0.00000 whatever 1%. You've got your vision, your hearing, all the different sensations, and your life is just essentially one long moment with this very, very narrow bandwidth. Think about what you're going to populate that with, and think about the different things that make you happy or make you sad or make you anxious or make you feel challenged in a way that's good. And really do take the time to do that audit and see what are the forces in my life that actually push me forward or relax me, make me feel loved or care about, or what are the things which make me feel depressed, anxious, or there's a real value in acclimatizing yourself to your emotions. Your emotions are a tool that were developed by millions of years of evolution, and they exist for a reason. Sometimes they're not right, but a lot of the time they are. So your intuition, I would say, is a very valuable thing. So think about what kind of needs you have as a person. What needs do you have, from friendships or romantic relationships, or from your family, from your physical body, in terms of your physical needs, and then in terms of career, think about what gives you that sense of total fascination. Like what subject area that you face at school or at college or at work or whatever, that you think, wow, I could spend all day on this, or like, wow, if they paid me to do this, that would be like winning the lottery. So that's kind of like very broad advice.
Yeah, no, but it still gives people a starting point, because a lot of people, they, I think what's come out from the lockdown as well and COVID-19, and people are now thinking maybe kind of going a bit more within, and maybe it's the first time they've done that. Maybe it's the first time they've gone within, they've asked certain questions and they're thinking, I don't have any answers.
Yeah.
And
or maybe maybe their life has finally slowed down enough that they can't just, because like if your life's really fast paced and running on momentum, I think you can tolerate a lot more stuff you don't like or that makes you unhappy, because you're too busy and there's too many things to deal with. And now, like, simultaneously for a lot of people, everyone had to there's like a forced meditation retreat where everyone's like stuck with themselves. And now I think people really had to reckon with like, what's my relationship like? What's my occupation like, if they're still fortunate enough to have an occupation? Or what's my relationship with my kids like, as you mentioned? And so I do think this is a really valuable opportunity to reassess everything, despite all the tragedy, which is, hardly needs mentioning.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's sometimes better to reframe the thoughts to, this is an opportunity, rather than, why is this happening to me? And kind of being that kind of victim, whether actual or, not. But yeah, it's, reframe those thoughts to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, what a lot of people did get, a lot of people lost, for example, money.
Yeah.
What a lot of people did get was time. And time is, in my opinion, way more valuable than money. And, I would say that with the huge caveat of, of course, if you've lost your job or you're in financial difficulty, of course, that's so hard. But it's still the case that time is the most finite resource we have, and everything that we can create that's productive or good or makes our lives better requires time as a resource. So if you find yourself having extra, see that it is very useful. It is a blessing in its own way, and there's a lot that you can do when you have a lot more free time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what are your thoughts on, because we talk about time and kind of going within, what are your thoughts about things like meditation? Do you think there's ultimately a place for meditation? What are your initial thoughts around it?
I mean, I've meditated on and off for about 4 or 5 years. So I've practiced mindfulness meditation, and I took a course in mindfulness stress reduction.
Yeah.
And I do it at my workplace as well for my colleagues. So I think I'm on the pro side, on the pro meditation side. Meditation is essentially, if I had to like boil it down, it's a bottomless subject, but if I had to boil it down, it's an opportunity for you to maintain your own mental health and to become more familiar with your own mind, up close and personal, not distracted, not clouded by all the things you have to do, or not clouded by horrors from the past or potential horrors in the future. But rather the much more, again, sobering horrors of what your mind is doing in each and every moment. Getting up close and personal with your thoughts and your emotions and your irrationalities, and getting really familiar with how they push you in different directions behavior wise. Becoming really familiar with how a lot of the time you're not making choices that you're actually happy with, or that you would actually make when you're in a calm state of mind. But again, you're being jostled by the momentum of your emotions and your thoughts and things like that. So I definitely think it has a place. And, you know, I think it's like brushing your teeth for your brain. I don't think you have to do a lot of it. I think 10 minutes a day is plenty. If you can do more, that's amazing. If you can do 1 minute a week, that's infinitely better than zero.
Yeah, I guess it's just making that habit of doing it, and it's that consistency that maybe gives you that kind of, you know, that outlet.
Yes, consistency is key.
Yeah, because there's that saying, go within or go without, which I've always quite liked, and I know that's more of a spiritual practice, but I guess,
but you know, meditation is a spirit. You know, it depends how you define spiritual. I think there's a big controversy about like mindfulness being divorced from Buddhism. Like a lot of people make a lot of noise about it. And I agree. I think that understanding the Buddhist philosophy as you practice meditation is essential. On the other hand, if you can only do 10 minutes on Headspace, but you don't have time to read about Buddhist philosophy, I think that's amazing too. I don't think you're being manipulated by the capitalist machine to become a better cog in the wheel, better cog in the machine, as some people would posit. So yes, I think big fan of the Buddhist philosophy, which enshrines it, and I'm not even sure if you can, to what extent meditation is not a spiritual practice. You know, it depends. One definition of spirituality is, I think, making yourself more immune to all the external stuff that happens, all the material stuff that happens in your surroundings, and becoming a stronger, kind of more stable internal anchor. And by that definition, you know, any practice of meditation is kind of a spiritual enterprise. But this kind of remains an open question for me.
It's I've always found meditation and things like breath work absolutely fascinating, and I know through my own journey, you know, I suffered from quite severe depression a while ago, and funnily enough, I went through the medical paradigm first, which just wasn't for me, just didn't work for me. Went through more psychotherapy, which was a lot better. And I think it was the psychotherapy that actually led me on the path of, you know, finding out more about myself. I started off on Buddhist meditation, actually going to like a temple practice and going down that road, and then found lots of other methods or methodologies to it, and ever since then it's gone off on a tangent, so much so I even like become a yoga teacher because I just wanted to know more. And I mean, bottomless, it is never ending.
I mean, sometimes I feel like in psychiatry we kind of forget everything that happened before like 1900, you know, and the truth is there are so many traditions that have been trying to solve the problem of being a person for thousands of years. You know, all the major religions and so many spiritual practices within them. It's like this, I do feel like there's so much to learn about how to contend with the tragedy of life. Like it's really, like, you know, you look at Buddhism, one of the first tenets of Buddhism is like life is suffering. And it sounds depressing, but actually when you like tell people, I think they're actually like, like life is suffering. And then like from that point, they can then proceed to make something out of it. Although it should be noted that I think life is suffering is kind of a little bit of a mistranslation. I think from the original Sanskrit, I think it's more like life is impermanent. And from impermanence derives suffering. So everything, you know, the joy of this cappuccino is impermanent, as is, you know, our relationships, as is ultimately our lives. And that almost dooms us to a degree to a certain amount of mental suffering. And yet then if you follow, for example, the Buddhist path, it shows you a path out of it. But I think all of the spiritual traditions have been wrestling with this concept for such a long time. And I think it's so useful and something I think about when I think about psychotherapy too, and psychiatry.
Yeah, I think it's, I guess, again, a lot of people kind of go, I think with children, they have this, they're almost like a spiritual practice unto themselves. They're very present. They're very much in the moment. And I guess as they get older, it's almost like they become indoctrinated into kind of a thought process or a way of thinking.
Yeah.
Sometimes useful, sometimes not. But there's less self-reflection. You know, and I think, and I know it's a practice I get, well, my eldest to do anyway. Like when we're having dinner, it's, you know, what are you thankful for today? You know, what didn't go so well? You know, what could you, you know, just getting him to kind of reflect on his day and how to kind of become more thoughtful, at least. Whereas people just get into this little bubble, and it's like, well, this happened to me. And it's like, I'm just going to try and resist that as much as possible. And that sometimes causes pain, that sometimes causes issues that they just maybe didn't need to, or they could reframe that pain to something else rather than, you know, why me?
I think two really important things you mentioned there. The first is how children, there's something that about that spontaneity, and that almost like default state of joy that they often have. I think a lot about psychotherapy is actually not becoming some amazing person or adding things to yourself. But a lot about psychotherapy is about removing stuff that you had to add on to yourself to deal with trauma or difficult experiences. So Carl Jung would have called this the persona. So we developed this persona like a suit of armor almost to deal with life's challenges. And then Carl Jung felt that the process of maturation was about individuation, becoming more yourself, removing the persona, getting back to that childlike state of spontaneity, of course, without the naiveness of being a child, but with a more of a adult head, but, you know, the child of the heart of a child, and that ability to have fun and experience life very much in the present moment. And then the second point you mentioned, gratitude as a frame shifter. I think one thing it's really important to understand about human beings is we're much more sensitive to negative emotions than we are to positive ones. Like one unit of negative event will generate a stronger negative emotional response than one unit of positive event will generate a positive response. Very good reason, because it keeps us alive, right? Again, we're engineered by evolution, and you know, the humans that were fretful and anxious and worried stayed alive, and the ones that were like grateful, they probably got killed by saber-toothed tigers. But now that our lives are safer and we live in this modern environment, we still have this brain that wants to create this negative narrative about the way our lives are going. And, you know, taking it consciously into our hands with something as simple and corny sounding as a gratitude exercise can be so helpful, just to like bring into your conscious awareness, like what are the good things that are going on. And, you know, like everything else is just like a muscle that can be trained, like happiness, enthusiasm is a muscle that can be trained, which is a very different way of thinking about it than the conventional medical paradigm. And also, I think, quite scary and threatening to people that have had difficult lives, I would think, for good reason. But I do think that at bottom, once you reach a sort of state of personal responsibility, emotions to a large degree, not entirely, become about choice. Like, what am I going to do to cultivate and engender more positive emotions? How am I going to metabolize my negative emotions in a way that's realistic and mature, but not perpetuating that cycle of negativity? I hope that makes a little sense.
No, definitely, because it puts a lot of context, I guess, to because I could mention, practicing gratitude, and I guess it's a case of, what's he talking about? You know, it's, you know, if someone's never practiced it before, then they may not be aware of, you know, exactly what it is or what it can do for us. But putting into context of, you know, especially the evolutionary process that we are, you know, in trains to become, you know, we're negative beings because that keeps us alive. But if we're in a safe space that we don't need to, and we start practicing that, it can possibly reframe thought and change us. I think it's important for people to know.
Yeah, like another thing that's become more popular recently is the self-compassion movement.
Yeah.
So that's another example of something which, when you do it and when you hear about it, it feels so, our culture has like trained us to feel it as so corny and contrived. But I think it's extremely important for people to, because whether you like it or not, you're in a relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
And you may deny this, but the truth is you talk to yourself all day. You make comments about yourself when things go right or wrong.
Oh, yes.
You treat yourself basically as though you're another person. And then the question is, what kind of relationship do you want with yourself?
Yeah.
And I think we talked a lot more about finding challenges and overcoming them earlier in the podcast. And I think that's really important. I think that represents a kind of, let's say, masculine form of parenting.
Yeah.
I think compassion and love for other people, love for yourself, that's unconditional, is the more feminine style of parenting. And I think we need both.
Yes.
And that's when I say masculine and feminine, obviously I don't mean that only a man can do the masculine and only a woman can do the feminine, because as you know, both men and women are capable
polarity more than anything.
It's a polarity. And we need, I think you find a lot of people that need more of a masculine love. Like maybe they've had too much feminine. Maybe they've had parents who are too much, you know, whatever you do, you're perfect.
Yeah.
And then you find a lot of people, and a lot of doctors are in this situation where they've had all the masculine encouragement and go out and challenge things, but they still have this sense of they have to meet conditions to feel valuable as a person.
Yeah.
And I think self-compassion exercises, so this would be, for example, a kind of meditation where it's basically give yourself a lot of positive self-talk, can be very, very useful as well. And I think we need a balance of both.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm glad you said about the self-compassion, because I think that was almost a place that I started, and it was a mentor of mine who basically said one thing to me, and I didn't know how to take it initially, but it was like, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see someone staring back at you that you're elated to see, that you love being? Or do you see someone that you feel sorry for, that you beat up? And when I physically did it, it was quite powerful, because I realized actually I beat this person up all the time. You know, I criticize, there was a level of guilt and so on, and that I guess I never knew existed. And when I speak to a lot of my male friends, and a lot of them maybe don't like talking like this, but when I get through to a couple of them, they turn around and they're like, actually, yeah, I feel the same. And it's amazing, especially amongst males. Bear in mind, I grew up in an all-female household, but especially amongst males, that there's a lot of like guilt and shame there that I guess guys don't know how to handle. I mean, is that something you've come across yourself in practice, or?
100%. You know, I think guilt, shame, too much self-criticism is at the root of a lot of people's anxiety or their depression. I think in extreme cases, it can even lead to like even. I kind of think that you have certain predispositions. Like you might have genetics that, for example, predispose you to depression, for instance. And then you have a life course, maybe, for example, parents that are very critical, and then you internalize that criticism, and that becomes self-criticism, and you're barely conscious of this as a process, if you're conscious of it at all. And then, you know, you do that to yourself for 10 years. You know, I know people who are highly successful, not even patients, highly successful people who tell me, I never feel like I've had a good day of work. I never feel like I've accomplished a lot in a day of work. And these are people who are, you know, excelling in their field. So, and I see my patients as well. You know, in psychiatry, you could go about it by, if you want to assess someone for depression, for instance, you could be like, do you have the depressive symptoms? Do you have low mood, you know, guilt, low energy? Is your sleep disrupted? Is your appetite disrupted? Do you have suicidal thoughts? It's like a list. And if you have them, then, you know, maybe you can make a diagnosis. But then there's an alternative way, which is just having a conversation with someone. Tell me about yourself. And if you can ask someone that and you listen for like an hour, you know, they'll tell you. They might not realize what exactly the problem is, but they'll tell you what the problem is. They'll be like, well, I don't feel like I've ever accomplished anything in my life, despite, you know, having a university degree and 3 jobs and good friends. And I just feel like I feel worthless. And then the question is, then I could be like, oh, you feel worthless, here's an SSRI. Or I could be like, oh, okay, you feel worthless. Why might it be that you feel worthless? So there's an opportunity to ask a deeper question. And you can ask the deeper questions and then also prescribe a medical treatment like an SSRI, right? And it could help. But the point is that, you know, it's so easy to get closed off. Stop asking questions right when very salient questions emerge.
Definitely.
And that's one of the things I struggle with in my practice.
I think it is crucial, you know, because they've told you the problem. It's a case of, okay, we need to delve deeper into that, because it's all very well you know the doctor, you know, knows, but I need to get you the person to really know, because you know, I can only support you, I can only guide you, but I can't push you through that door. And yes, you know, the antidepressants and so on will give a support structure, but they're not the answer, so to speak. But yeah.
I think the tension, the paradox of anyone in the situation that's trying to improve their circumstance, like you'd probably see this with weight loss or improving your physique quite a lot. The paradox is you have to love yourself where you're at, wherever you happen to be, but you also have to aspire to be better at the same time. And you have to hold those two things in mind simultaneously. And that's what's so tricky psychologically, I think.
But yeah, I would say, the first instance is you have to accept yourself, you know, warts and all. Want to improve, want to have more. But I think a lot of people, they deny themselves and think they want, you know, more of, you know, an iPhone, or they want, you know, these external things, but they don't really kind of, you know, fill that void because they haven't developed who they are or accepted who they are, maybe. And this is, bear in mind, you know, I'm an armchair psychologist, so these are just my thoughts based on, you know, my experience. But I see a lot of this within, you know, health and fitness. Always have done, and I've always found it curious, you know, because, like, for instance, we're going to come on to, I guess, how physical exercise can help mental illness and so on, but within fitness, I've always, from early on in my career, I've always found it fascinating how obesity is increasing year on year. And there's more and more fitness professionals, and they can help people. And some people really get results, and a lot of people really don't get results. But the information technically is the same, or there are different versions of it, but thereabouts. And I guess that led me on to kind of, well, there must be more. There must be an aspect we're overlooking, and it's the person. And then it's a case of, what does that person really want? What do they want to achieve? Who they are as a person? And I've always found that just, you know, extremely fascinating. But and that was the same in the diabetes prevention program. You know, there was a physical aspect, there was a dietary aspect, but there was also a psychological aspect, and that was the thing that tied those things together, which was amazing. And that's really what got people results.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a psychological process, having to change your physique in that way. I think it's worth mentioning, if we're talking about the obesity crisis in general, at a population level, a huge amount must be attributed to industrialized food processes over the past 50 years, I think. And I think that debate is fairly settled, and the predominance of like very refined, overly processed, particularly carbohydrates, but then also some kinds of fats as well, the margarine and the things like that. Those are the ones, So I think that a huge amount can be laid at the feet of the diet that we're all kind of, in a weird way, as children, subjected to in this kind of large-scale experiment. But then, as you say, when someone decides they want to pursue this change, I would say it's like 80% psychological, because you're fighting against your psychology to eat, correctly, and not. That usually means you have to stop eating to comfort yourself. You have to stop eating to soothe your difficult emotions. And then, of course, there's a set of physical exercises you have to do. And of course, the good thing is that those exercises can be just as soothing as if not more soothing, to low mood or anxiety. And we have studies which show this now, that physical exercise is as effective as antidepressant medication. And I'm not surprised. I have my own experience with this. I've lost quite a significant amount of weight in my life. So I used to weigh about 100 kg when I was 19.
Okay.
And now I weigh about 70, and I've had a lot of experience with like learning more about nutrition and different kinds of diets and things like that. But it is such a mental game, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's how strange. When I was 19, I weighed over 100 kilos, and I had to play the mental game of reducing that weight, because I was it was massive. I walked with a waddle. I was into powerlifting, and I thought, stronger is better. Get big. It wasn't the sort of big that I kind of set out to achieve, and it was tough. I would say it was, it was all a mental game. The physicality of it is actually quite a straightforward process. It's battling with you fundamentally is the process.
And what I love about something like weightlifting, exercise in general, but particularly weightlifting, is it maps so well onto psychological challenges. Like, I think our physical body and our psychology work in a very similar way, where for example, in weightlifting, it's extremely important, you'd know more than anyone, that it's picking the right weight is extremely important. You can't pick a weight that's too light, because your muscles aren't going to be forced to grow and adapt. But if you pick a weight that's too heavy, you either can't lift it, or worse, you'll injure yourself. The same is true for psychological challenges. So if you have, for example, an anxiety problem, say you're anxious about leaving the house, you have agoraphobia, you can't tell that person to go to a party with 100 people. Like, it's the equivalent of benching 100 kilos where you've never benched in your life. You have to tell that person, go to the door and sit by the door for 5 minutes. And then you feel very anxious. And then your brain will kind of realize there's nothing to be afraid of, and it'll calm down. This is the essence of behavioral therapy or behavior conditioning. And then you said the next challenge and the next challenge. Maybe you go outside your house for 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. So if you learn about how to challenge your physical body, you're simultaneously learning how to challenge yourself psychologically.
Yeah, it's all about those little steps, and it's all dose dependent.
Yeah.
Yeah, you if you went straight to, you know, lifting heavy weights, you just break yourself, and yeah, not
Hmm.
enough stress. There's that Goldilocks zone, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's really important. So, I mean, just in your experience, I mean, we mentioned kind of you know, physical health. You know, you'll know a lot about how to challenge, you know, mental health and so on. But I guess coming back to physical health, and again, there may not be an answer to this, and that's okay. Are there any particular sorts of training or physical exercise that would directly impact someone's mental health? Is it, you know, more weightlifting? Is it more, you know, getting out and running? You know, just in your
Mm.
experience, I guess.
So I guess I think about exercise in three domains.
Yeah.
You've got your cardio, your strength or your resistance training, and then your flexibility, which is I would conceive of as like yoga, maybe
Yeah.
Pilates to a degree. I think they all, I mean, I don't understand the physiology well enough, but I suspect that they all help in different ways, just like different drugs have different pathways. So
Yeah.
for example, you know, morphine affects the opiate system, and
Yeah.
cannabis affects the endocannabinoid
Mm.
system, etc., etc. So I think similarly, different kinds of exercise will activate different pathways, which help you feel good in different ways. In terms of what I would advise someone to do, I would say do whatever you think you'll actually do. So if you think you'll go running, but there's no way you'll set foot in the gym, then just do that. That's fine. In an ideal situation, if you're kind of up for anything, I would encourage a mix
Mm.
of anything, bit of walking, jogging, running, some kind of resistance training, even if it's very basic, like the 4 basic exercises of like squats, pull-ups, planks, and push-ups.
Yeah.
Just hit those 4 areas. And then if you can do some yoga as well, I think that's amazing too. And then what I would always say is, getting back to kind of what we mentioned previously, is just start small. And I mean like ridiculously small. Like if you can only do 5 push-ups and that's the entire workout,
Yeah.
and you would normally do nothing, 5 push-ups is so much better than doing
Yeah.
nothing. It's hard even to overstay.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Start small and build up from there.
Yeah. Start from where you are, not where you want to be. And it's
100%.
a lot of people kind of, they see their friends or they see something on TV. Well, I can do that. And you know, we see every January, you know, after Christmas and New Year, people flock to gyms and they do the hardest, you know, the baddest class they can get hold of, and injured or.
Yeah, I'm learning more about putting on muscle now. It's not something I had a huge amount of experience with before this year, but I'm experimenting more with it. I'm realizing, you know, it's a temporal game. It's all about time.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you know, when you start working out to try and put on muscle, you think, oh man, in 4 weeks, like 4 weeks of doing these exercises, I'm gonna look totally different. And then you realize it's actually the timeline is like years that you should think about.
Yeah,
And it's a long game, but
it's
so
like funny.
enjoyable.
People don't realize that, you know, the first 4 to 6 weeks is all, it's all about the nervous system, you know, ramping up. You don't actually even put on muscle in the first 4 to 6 weeks, but after that it's about volume, you know, muscle mass. They love volume, you know, repetition after repetition, and yeah, that's then a time issue, unfortunately. Yeah, and I just realized that sun's just come out.
Yeah.
Hold on. There we go. Fantastic. There we go. So yeah, with regards to training's always a funny one. And I guess, like I mentioned before, I guess I've always been interested in not just the, you know, physical aspect, but also a mental health aspect. And realize actually that they're completely joined together, like with things like physical training enhancing memory and learning. And this is something you kind of carries over to things like dementia, for instance. I mean, have you heard of anything around that, or
With dementia specifically?
Yeah, dementia, and kind of maybe the offshoots like Alzheimer's and so on.
It's not there I know a huge amount about, but what I would say is, the general rule in biology is if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And I do think there's enough evidence to say that our brain and our physical body are very much one thing. And I'm pretty sure that physical exercise definitely regular physical exercise staves off cognitive decline.
Yeah.
So, and then, when you think about different kinds of dementia, for instance, there's one kind of dementia, which is vascular dementia. It's quite different from Alzheimer's or other dementias. And that's literally a deterioration of the small blood vessels in the brain in a way that's very similar to the deterioration of blood vessels around your heart that might predispose you to a heart attack. And I certainly think good exercise and particularly good nutrition, like a diet that doesn't promote a lot of inflammation, be very useful for staving that off. I think Alzheimer's is trickier and other kinds of dementia, although I have heard that there might be some really important dietary impacts, like, for example, ketogenic diets may really impact the quality of life of people with dementia. And the idea behind that is that glucose metabolism is actually quite damaging, can be quite damaging to cells and particularly brain cells. This is something I'd need to look deeper into. But there is some suggestion, I believe, in the literature that low sugar diets can really help with improving cognition in dementia.
Yeah, I've heard about, I guess, trials using ketogenic diets with people who suffer from seizures.
That's why that was when it initially was invented.
Okay.
And similarly, there's something about the ketogenic diet and the brain having to run on ketones rather than glucose, which caused an improvement for seizures.
Yeah, I know. Like, because in the fitness and wellness world, they're keen to always jump on things, and you then get ketogenic diet advocates who ketogenic diets for everyone, and I'm not necessarily for that. I think I think just like anything, it's then a dose dependent thing. What might be good for someone,
100%
good for someone else. And
the maxim I'm starting to live by is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Talk about taking away childlike enthusiasm.
What's the biggest trade-off that you've made, whether physical, whether nutritional?
God, that's a good question. What's the biggest trade-off I've made? Probably sacrificing immediate pleasure and satisfaction, like what I would call hedonism. Like that kind of very ephemeral and present pleasure for a more stable and nourishing sense of satisfaction at having accomplished something. That's maybe the broader trade-off I've made as I've gotten older. There's less alcohol and things like that, and more like things which, although they don't give you that immediate gratification of like, wow, things are amazing now, like pizza gives you that. It's more like, wow, I've worked out for like 6 months and I can see the effect. It's different.
It's that kind of visualizing that more long-term.
And what's really cool about it is then you can kind of, once you start to see how effective it is, you start to take a weird pride in even like the more mundane aspects of it. Like there's something about the lonely walk to the gym. You can take pride in that kind of day in, day out sharpening of the sword. I don't know. It gets interesting.
It's funny actually. As soon as gyms close, you realize, I only realized this recently actually, because it was pointed out to me that I spent over half my life in a gym, and when it's taken away, I realize actually what a massive effect it had on me. But it's kind of that walk to the gym is the kind of, it's almost like this ritual.
It's a ritual, and we're so ritualized as a species, like even the things we don't, the things we don't realize are rituals, are very much rituals. And prescribing antidepressants, or as a patient receiving antidepressants, is a kind of a ritual too.
Yeah.
All of these things.
Yeah. Nice. So, I mean, what is the, I guess as we kind of head towards the end of this interview, what does the future hold for you? Where are you looking to go? What's your ultimate journey or goal?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm in the middle of my psychiatric training.
Yeah.
So I'm what you'd call a registrar, and I'm at the very beginning of my psychotherapy training. I'm kind of somewhere in between in terms of podcasting.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to create a career for myself that revolves around those three aspects, I think. Understanding mental health conditions better, understanding people better, and struggling with the challenges of helping people. And it's really, really hard to help people, as you know, from your job too. And then also making content that I think, like you mentioned, is accessible, and that people can get stuff out of it.
Yeah.
And that's it's kind of generic, but yeah, that's where I'm going, I think.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, fantastic. And if people want to, I guess, get hold of you or kind of see your stuff, we mentioned the podcast. Do you have an Instagram page? Anything where people can get hold of you?
Yeah, so my Twitter is at Maudsley Podcast, and I think Instagram is Maudsley Learning Podcast.
Yeah.
And if you want to get in touch for podcast rated stuff, the email is podcast@maudsleyllearning.com, and then you can find the podcast itself on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.
All the usual platforms.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Alex, for joining us today. That was such an interesting conversation, and I'm pretty sure people are going to get a lot out of it. I know I did.
Thank you, Kieran. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Let me just